Hello and welcome to Political Chinwag. As usual, you're joining me, Scott, Jordan, and Zoe. Today's guest is Roger Stone. Roger is a seasoned political operative, speaker, pundit, and New York Times bestselling author featured in the Netflix documentary Get Me Roger Stone. Good evening, Roger. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with us today.
Delighted to be with you.
Well, let's jump straight in. Um, I got so many questions for you, wouldn't believe. My first one is, what was it like working with some of the most influential presidents in modern history?
It's been a great experience. They're all very different. In many ways, they're all alike in the sense that they were all leaders and they each knew what they were about. But the differences between, for example, President Nixon, who was an introvert in an extrovert's business, and Ronald Reagan, who was the ultimate extrovert, very different. Reagan, very much like Trump, a big picture man, very, very self confident, uh, very focused on his performance, got strength from people, liked people, whereas Nixon had to struggle to make small talk. It wasn't that he was arrogant, which many people thought. It was that he was shy. So very different, but all great in their own way. If you asked me to name the greatest president in my lifetime, it'd be very difficult because I was born in 1952, and based on everything that I have studied and read, Dwight Eisenhower was a very great but extremely underrated president, perhaps because he himself was so low key. But you had unprecedented prosperity and peace during 8 years of the Eisenhower presidency. Plus, he warned us about the deep state. He warned us about what he called the military industrial complex, and therefore very great in his own way. Richard Nixon, who, despite Watergate, reached a strategic arms limitation agreement with the Soviets, opened the door to China at a time that China was a backwards, dirt poor agrarian society, used them skillfully, played them off against the Soviets to win those concessions to get a strategic arms limitation agreement from the Soviets. Those who blame Nixon for our current problems with China misunderstand the dynamic, meaning it was not until the Clintons and the Bushes gave the Chinese most favored nation trading status that China became a superpower that threatens our own nation. Nixon also desegregated the public schools, unilaterally saved Israel from annihilation in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, ended the military draft, gave us the 18-year-old vote, launched the war on cancer that has made so much progress. This list goes on, but of course, all of that gets buried in the ashes of Watergate. And then there, of course, is Ronald Reagan, who I worked for in three presidential campaigns: 1976, 1980, and 1984. A very great man in his own right, extraordinarily resilient, confident, upbeat, gregarious, an optimist without any question. Uh, of all of them, I would have to say each one of the presidents that I've worked with had a public persona and a private persona, and they didn't always exactly match. The exception to that rule is Reagan. The Reagan you saw on TV, the Reagan you saw in public was a direct and exact reflection of the Reagan in private. A very confident, upbeat, optimistic, slow to anger individual. Very, very balanced, extremely balanced. And of course, there's Trump, who is, I think, people don't really recognize. Trump is just, he's a regular guy. In other words, being with Donald Trump is a huge amount of fun. He pokes funny at himself. He has kind of inside jokes. He's got a good sense of humor about everything. He's also extraordinarily resilient. I don't know who else could take the beating that he has taken, the beating that continues to this day. In fact, I would argue it's been amplified in the last couple of months, and he really lets it roll down his back. So it's really quite extraordinary. It's been a great experience. they were all different in their own way.
Who would you say was your favorite president to work for? I mean, I think your tattoo on your back may give it away, but
I can't possibly answer that question as long as Donald Trump is still alive.
that's very wise. It's been 50 years since Watergate, isn't it? It's been quite a long time now.
It has, and of course, what's interesting is, as you know, I've written a book on the Kennedy assassination. It's a New York Times bestseller. Even with the constant flow of disinformation coming from the three television networks plus CNN, in a Gallup poll not that long ago, 73% of the people do not believe Lee Harvey Oswald killed John F. Kennedy and acted alone. Uh, but Watergate as a topic, there's very, very little public interest in. Only about a month ago, new documents were declassified, which proved beyond any doubt that the Central Intelligence Agency knew about the break in and advance, that the Central Intelligence Agency had penetrated the Watergate burglar team, that at least four of the burglars were on the CIA payroll at the time of the break in, and were reporting to their CIA handlers in real time. That both Watergate special prosecutors, Archibald Cox and Leon Jaworski, were well aware of the CIA's role in the entire caper, but never allowed it to be brought up in the public hearings. And that when Howard Baker and Republicans on the Senate Watergate Committee sought to publish a minority report, Senator Sam Ervin would not even allow that. So we have learned so very much about Watergate. The Woodward Bernstein Washington Post version of events is a complete concoction. Bob Woodward is a congenital liar who's covered up his own role in naval intelligence. Deep Throat is not Mark Felt, for example. Deep Throat is far more likely Alexander Haig, the president's chief of staff, whose real job was to end the Nixon presidency and peacefully hand power over to Gerald Ford, and then after the fact, engineer the pardon of Richard Nixon, all of which he very skillfully did. Unfortunately, the public is very disinterested in Watergate. I've written two books on Watergate and on the Nixon presidency, Nixon's Secrets, and the Rise and Fall and Rise of Richard M. Nixon, Tricky Dick, and neither one of those books has done nearly as well as my book on the Kennedy assassination.
I'm reading both the Kennedy assassination one at the moment and the Nixon secrets one. You definitely don't hold back on the Nixon secrets ones. I was quite surprised to read some of the stuff you put in there. It's a very interesting book.
Well,
Um,
John Dean, has reinvented himself as a whistleblower, as a hero. No, John Dean is the man who planned, pushed, and covered up the Watergate break-in for his own purposes. And Phil Stanford wrote a great book called White House Call Girl. I strongly recommend it to you. It's available in paperback. It's still in publication. White House Call Girl. John Dean is no hero. He is no whistleblower. He has walked away from a train wreck, and of course, to cosset himself, to protect himself, he has steadily moved left since then.
did Watergate affect you personally after that scandal came out?
Very,
Professionally?
very deeply. I mean, I was 19 years old. I was the youngest person to work for the committee to reelect the president on the senior staff. I was out of work for 2 years, just literally unemployable because of the taint of Watergate. I did go to the Watergate grand jury, and I was questioned by the Watergate special prosecutors, although, frankly, I don't really know why, because I really knew nothing about the Watergate break in or the so called dirty tricks operation run by Donald Segretti and others. I myself engaged in some pretty puerile so called dirty tricks at the direction of my boss, but they were not illegal. And when you look back at them now, they pale in comparison to the greatest single dirty trick in American political history, which is the use by Barack Obama and Joe Biden of the full authority of the United States government and the capacity of our intelligence agencies using what they knew was falsified information in the Steele dossier and the CrowdStrike's report to rationalize the appointment of a special counsel for the purposes of undoing a presidential election and removing Donald Trump from office.
I want to jump into another subject I'm quite interested in, which I saw in the documentary on Netflix, was about the Brooks Brothers riot.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. This is another example of a false narrative promulgated by the legacy media. I was never a Bush Republican. I think people know that. In 1980, I worked for Ronald Reagan. I came to know James A. Baker III, who was later Reagan's chief of staff, but before that, George Bush's campaign manager. In 1981, I headed the campaign of Thomas H. Kane, who ran for governor of New Jersey. This was kind of my first solo gig as a political consultant. That was very important to me. In the United States, only Virginia and New Jersey elect their governors in the off year. And therefore, all attention was on those two races. Um, the Republicans thought they would win Virginia and surely lose New Jersey. That was wrong. I ran a very good campaign for Tom Kane, and I lobbied Jim Baker to have President Ronald Reagan visit New Jersey in the closing days of that race because I really thought it would make the difference. In the end, Baker pushed that idea. Reagan agreed. Reagan appeared in New Jersey the weekend before the election, and my candidate, Tom Kane, won by 1,600 votes out of 2.2 million cast. So when 2000 rolled around and Jim Baker called, now in his new role running the recount for George W. Bush, and asked me, given my expertise in recounts from New Jersey, to go to Florida and assist, there was no way I could say no. Politics is about paying your debts, despite the fact that I was not a Bush Republican. The idea that I closed down a recount in Miami-Dade County is false. I did stop the recount of the same sheaf of ballots for the third time, and there is a huge difference. Um, Specifically, the Brooks Brothers riot, as it has been uh, falsely named, took place when two Democratic officials sought to take the ballots in question into a closed room with no windows, no doors, and no observers in violation of Florida's very strong sunshine law. At that juncture, yes, I did give the direction to the people on the scene that they shouldn't let that door be closed. I was working within the law. And at that point, the recount effort by Al Gore collapsed and George W. Bush was declared the winner. But to say that we closed down a recount is technically and factually incorrect.
Talking of the George Bush campaign, did you know that a British or current British MP was actually head of foreign press for George Bush's campaign, Penny Mordaunt?
I did not know that. Pardon me one second. I'm sorry, I had to. I'm trying to keep up with the whip count here for
Yeah, I can
the
imagine.
speaker of the House.
I was thinking we should start looking along those lines. I wanted to ask your opinion about your predictions for the Republican nominations. Obviously, Trump's going to run again. Who do you think who would be alongside him? Do you think Ted Cruz will run? I mean, Mike Pence was rumored to have put his name in the hat, wasn't he?
I don't think you can decide who the right person for vice president is until you see how the nomination contest has gone. And then, on the basis of that contest, see where the ticket needs help. So, the idea of naming your vice president early, in this case, makes no sense at all. You would choose a vice president, whoever you are, after the nomination process is over, after you have secured enough delegates to be nominated on the first ballot, and as you are heading into a convention. Uh, so, for example, the selection of Mike Pence was based on a need to reinforce Donald Trump's conservative credentials and also his standing with evangelical Christians who were skeptical about his New York lifestyle and the fact that many years before he was nominated for president, he had been a contributor to Planned Parenthood. He had been a supporter of same-sex marriage. His positions had evolved on those issues, but some Republican voters needed reassurance, and the selection of Mike Pence served that purpose. So it's much too early to say who would make sense uh, for the ticket until you've seen the nominating process and how it has gone.
Do you think DeSantis is going to be a problem for Trump?
I think that he will be a formidable contender if for no other reason he comes from a large state and he has a substantial amount of money in the bank. But I think his record is going to undergo a scrutiny that will not serve him well. At the same time, he's calling for a state grand jury to investigate the safety and effectiveness of COVID 19 vaccinations. He signed a law that gave complete legal immunity to those who pushed and manufactured the vaccination. So, is this a head fake? He signed an executive order which mandates that no public or private entity can require the wearing of masks. But right now at Broward General Hospital, miles from where I'm sitting, employees who are not vaccinated are being required to wear masks lest they be fired in violation of his executive order. He signed another executive order prohibiting school boards in Florida from approving curriculum which includes a critical race theory or other gender notions. That is being violated today uh, by a number of school districts adopting an ADL approved curriculum, which really does push white hate. He, as you know, did away with the tax status for Disney because Disney opposed his move to prevent these teachings in the schools. And then the governor was caught red-handed not long ago, secretly negotiating to restore these special benefits to Disney. I predict that, despite his statement that he's not going to do that, he is going to do that. That's because he took $1 million from Disney just before the election. $1 million. Think about that for a moment. And then, of course, we don't know where Ron DeSantis is on this war in Ukraine. I think most Republicans support Ukraine. Most Republicans oppose the Russians, but most Republicans also did not want to spend $100 billion on it, and they don't want to spend another penny on it. And that is another potentially important, I should say, defining issue for Governor DeSantis. But I do not underrate him, or more precisely, I don't underrate his wife because she's the one who's made this decision that he should run for president. Wasn't it Eve who told Adam to bite the apple? It seems to me it was. I think that in this case, she has urged him to do something that could, in the long term, hurt his career.
I had also noticed it hadn't gone unnoticed that Jeb Bush was at his inauguration, wasn't he?
Pardon me 1 second. Let me look at the vote count here, if I may. It is interesting that Jeb Bush, who was not at the first inauguration of Ron DeSantis, was front and center. A man is known by those he surrounds himself with. And in this instance, I think that Paul Ryan, Jeb Bush, Meghan McCain, when these are the people propping up your candidacy, uh, billionaires who are doing business in China, uh, globalist money, establishment money. I think that really tells you that Ron DeSantis, while he endeavors to sound very MAGA, uh, he really doesn't walk the walk. So, for example, if you go to the school districts where he has fined the school district because they have defied him on masks, he then quietly goes back and cancels those fines. Or counties where he has fined the county board of commissioners for defying him on masks. He then, after the election, quietly circles back and cancels those fines. So if he runs, his record will get a very vigorous examination.
Jumping on to the speaker elections, then, I noticed on the fourth round McCarthy still hadn't won. I don't know what the score was on the fourth round, but I had also noticed that Byron Donalds has been announced. Is that right?
Yes, I think this is a stroke of brilliance by Matt Gaetz, who is essentially the floor manager for the anti McCarthy forces. Byron Donalds is, of course, an African American 2 term congressman from Florida. It was very wise, I think, to put Jim Jordan's name in the mix when they did. But Jordan is not a willing accomplice, as it were. He clearly, truly does not want to be Speaker. When he rose to speak, it's very interesting. He spoke in favor of Kevin McCarthy, but you notice he did not withdraw his own name from nomination. That's because he doesn't want to hurt the movement. McCarthy is now fallen short on 4 ballots. This is an epic political failure. Now, for those who say, "Oh, how embarrassing for the Republican Party," no, stop with the pearl clutching. A vigorous contest for the leadership beats the hell out of a North Korea style selection process in which everything is done behind closed doors. So, this is democracy in action. This is how a democratic republic functions. I think it's a very healthy debate that is being held. It also puts a lot of Freedom Caucus members, on the under the spotlight where they deserve to be. The Freedom Caucus sent McCarthy a letter last Sunday. He never fully responded to every point in that letter. Had he done so, I think he might have had the votes on the first ballot. But it's very hard to understand former President Trump's full throated endorsement of McCarthy last night and this morning, because as much as the president dislikes Mitch McConnell, he would be hard put to articulate the difference between McConnell and McCarthy on the issues. Um, Most repugnant to many of the Freedom Caucus members is the use by McCarthy of party funds to defeat more conservative challengers in numerous congressional primaries. And that has been a problem.
I noticed there's a bit of a split between the MAGA Republicans over the McCarthy nomination for Speaker. I mean, I know Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren. Is it Laura or Lauren? Laura Boebert have been firing shots at each other over Twitter.
Yeah, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene has lost a lot of credibility in this particular fight. You can't be both a fire breather and a regular, and she's trying to bridge that. Many people legitimately asking, um, what deal did she make? What's in it for her? I think her reputation is taking a beating. You may have seen her remarks in New York 3 weeks ago. This is really kind of boggles the mind, where she actually stands up in a young Republican Christmas gala at which I was present. This is the 104th year that this particular event has taken place. This is the oldest young Republican club in the United States, one that Theodore Roosevelt belonged to. And she said, I'm paraphrasing, you can tell that Steve Bannon and I did not run the January 6th operation because if we ran it, the people who entered the Capitol would have been armed. Now, I can't imagine who would say such a thing
Yeah, it's pretty
or
bad.
who would think that that was clever or funny because it is neither. That entire day is a tragedy from many points of view. Um, but despite the rhetoric of the left, 5 people were not killed that day. 2 people were killed. They were both women shot and killed in cold blood by Capitol Hill police officers. They were both unarmed, unwarned, and menacing no one whatsoever. I take it back. One was shot and killed. The other one was literally bludgeoned to death with a nightstick. And the other 3 people who died, Capitol Hill police officers, 2 of them committed suicide and one of them had a stroke, all of which happened after the fact. It's a tragedy in any case, but not a single person who entered the Capitol was armed other than police or law enforcement. And that, of course, gets lost in the mix.
What do you think about the Jan 6 committee and their recommendations, which I think they've withdrawn now, haven't they, in regards to Trump?
They didn't. They only withdrew a subpoena to Donald Trump because they were going to lose in court. We have co-equal branches of government. Congress has never been successful in subpoenaing a current president or a former president. House Republicans tried to subpoena former President Harry Truman in the 50s. He refused to appear, and that was kind of the end of it. So they would have lost in court. Now, their recommendations are, of course, kind of naked in their intent. On the one hand, the Democrats and their handmaidens in the mainstream media tell us that Donald Trump is damaged and he is hopeless and that his political fortunes are dwindling. But in the next breath, they're deathly afraid to run against him again in 2024. And therefore, his conviction on one of the specific counts that they have referred to the Justice Department in a very one sided investigation in which there's no cross examination of witnesses, and in which some obvious witnesses, such as Nancy Pelosi herself, are never put on the witness stand and subjected to vigorous cross examination. But his conviction on one of those counts, sedition, would legally prohibit him from seeking the presidency. And that is their purpose. Will the Justice Department go that far? I've been a victim of this Justice Department. I can tell you that when they are politically motivated, they can be extraordinarily vicious, and I put nothing whatsoever beyond them. So, if you ask me, do I think President Trump will be unfairly and unjustly charged? It is my opinion that he will be. How will that play out? As Donald Trump would say, we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Talking of can you talk about your trial and your experience with the FBI raid? Is that something you can talk about?
Sure, it's a pretty simple. I mean, one cannot lie under oath to Congress about Russian collusion that never took place. The government never provided any evidence at my trial of any Russian collusion or WikiLeaks collaboration. And any misstatement I made to the House committee, where I appeared voluntarily, by the way, under oath, is immaterial. There was nothing to hide. Most people don't know this, but on November 3rd, 2020, by court order, the Justice Department was required to release the last remaining redacted sections of Robert Mueller's long held secret report, in which even he himself admitted that there was, quote, no factual evidence to tie me to Russian collusion, WikiLeaks collaboration, or the phishing and release of John Podesta's email. So, what was the purpose of this exercise other than personal destruction? It's really quite simple. They arrested me in January. By July, they made a demand that I testify falsely against President Donald Trump. They had the record of some 29 cell phone calls between me and candidate Trump, all of which took place in 2016. And they wanted me to testify falsely that these calls pertained in some way to WikiLeaks or the Russians or whatever falsehood they wanted me to say. And I refused. Uh, Obviously, they could simply have contacted my lawyers, told them that I would be charged, and I would have been required to quietly turn myself in. But instead, they staged a dramatic raid in which 29 FBI agents, fully adorned in full SWAT gear, brandishing M4 fully automatic weapons, surrounded my home at 6 o'clock in the morning, all for the benefit of CNN's cameras. CNN, as you probably know, claims that they were just there on a journalistic hunch. But a reporter, Sarah Murray from CNN, I was arrested at 6:06. At 6:11, she texted a copy of my sealed indictment to one of my attorneys. In the metadata tags of that document are the initials of the man who wrote it, Andrew Weissman, one of the prosecutors on the Mueller strike force. Indelible, absolute proof that the document went to CNN from Weissman in violation of the law and that he tipped off CNN to my arrest in advance. The joke is on them. I'm not a very sympathetic figure, but I raised $2.5 million for my legal defense fund in the 2 days after I was arrested. And I think the American people could see that I was being victimized. I could very easily have decided to cooperate to save my own skin, but I refused to do that as a matter of principle. And I prayed fervently for the commutation of sentence and pardon that I ultimately received. No, just to answer the question constantly raised by the left, no, I had no agreement to cover up for Donald Trump in return for a pardon because there was nothing to cover up for.
Your trial was quite an experience as well. I read Milo Yiannopoulos' book about the trial. Um,
The trial was a horrific experience because, for two reasons. The judge essentially might as well have been another member of the prosecution. She denied every one of our pretrial motions. Therefore, the premise of my indictment was that the Russians hacked the DNC and gave the information to the Trump campaign. The problem, or pardon me, to WikiLeaks, who then gave the information to the Trump campaign. The judge would not allow me to use expert testimony or forensic evidence to prove that that online hack never took place. Nor would the judge allow me to use corruption by the prosecutors, the FBI, the Department of Justice, or any member of Congress. There'll be no investigating of the investigators in my courtroom, said the judge, helping seal my pardon. And then, of course, after the trial, we learned that the jury forewoman, who said during jury selection that she had no idea who I was and wasn't aware of my case, had been attacking me on Twitter and Facebook a full year before I was charged regarding the very case in which she was later selected as a juror. Undeniable evidence of bias and perjury. And of course, the judge ultimately ruled after the trial that that would not entitle me to another trial. So it was a Soviet style witch hunt. It was a horrific experience. It cost me and my wife our home, our savings, my ability to travel freely. I was gagged by a federal judge, which is unconstitutional. Nowhere in U.S. law does it say when you are charged with a crime, you lose your right to speak. But I couldn't mount any public defense. Even today, I am, unfortunately, an extraordinarily polarizing figure. There are still people out there who think I'm a Russian traitor. Yet my trial produced no evidence of that whatsoever. I had relatives mowed down by Russian tanks in Budapest in 1956. I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin or his autocratic and brutal system. But there are still people who call me a traitor. These are people who have, of course, bought the big lie technique of the fake news, corporate legacy media.
Is it right they thought Lee Brown was your own court artist? Didn't she get kicked out
Yeah,
because of it?
except for she didn't work for me. She was a freelance artist working for herself. She asked the bailiff's permission to sit where she was sitting, and it was granted. Somebody told the judge that she was there on my dime. It just wasn't so. She's a very, very talented woman, but she was not working for me. She was working for herself.
She's done some great paintings of you, though.
She did. She's also done a number of paintings of Steve Bannon, of which I've been extraordinarily critical. But
I can imagine. We're actually trying to get her to come on the podcast as well. So if you know,
she
if you could give her a nudge.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. Lee, she's very, very talented.
Yeah, she's
She's
nice.
kind of like Halston. She works under one name, Lee. So I honestly don't know her last name, but she's extraordinarily talented, and I'm writing a book on this very topic, the 2 year odyssey of having the full power of the federal government trying to put you away, and I'm going to be using a number of her illustrations in the book. But I stress again, at the time of the trial, she was not working for me, and I did not have my own graphic artist in court.
I wanted to bring up your best dress list.
Yes,
I quite enjoy this. And Zoe and I were talking about it before as well.
Yeah.
Quite enjoy it. I quite liked Greg Kelly this
he's
year.
a very, very well dressed chap. He's a friend of mine. About a year ago, he posted on Twitter, where I have only recently been readmitted. And by the way, if you're on Twitter, you can follow me at Roger J. Stone Jr., Roger J. Stone Jr. Don't forget the J, Roger J. Stone Jr. But he mused on Twitter that perhaps he would start producing an annual list of the best and worst dressed people in the world and posting it on New Year's Day, which is, of course, something I've done for 14 years now, 13 of those years consecutively. There was no list in 2020 because I was under the federal gag order. I couldn't comment on any topic online. And in 2021, Mrs. Stone had just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, which I'm happy to report she is in full remission from. But I have now renewed the tradition. I told Greg Kelly he could take over the writing of this column when I die. and not before. As you may know, I got this tradition from the late Mr. Blackwell. He was a Washington bon vivant, and pardon me, he was a Hollywood bon vivant and columnist who would produce such a list. He did so for almost 48 years. When I read that he had passed in 2008, I decided to pick up this gauntlet, and I produced an international best and worst dressed list every year since then, with the interruption of 2020 and 2021. You can see it at rogerstone.substack.com is the best place to go. It's free, but it's not a political list, as you know. Senator Ted Kennedy was on my list at one time. Joe Biden, who I strongly dislike and think is out of his mind, but he's on my best dress list because he deserves to be. His choice of neckwear is literally impeccable. We had a lot of fun with it. Senator-elect John Fetterman is on the worst list. Sam Brinton is on the worst list. Look, if you're going to dress like a woman, fine, but it shouldn't be a trashy woman. Dress like a classy woman. Not everything you wear as a woman should be off the shoulder. And I don't know if you want to dress like a woman, that's your right, I guess, but you should probably shave the mustache because, a low cut ball gown and a mustache really, they just don't go together. I urge people to go look at the list. You can see it again at rogerstone.substack.com.
We put out obviously open questions for you, and Zoe's compiled a list of questions from followers. Would you be happy to answer some of those questions?
Sure, we have a little bit of time. Let's go to the top of the hour, and then I've got to jump.
That's fine.
That's fine. So the first question is, what were your views about JFK to 9/11? Everything is a rich man's trick. The person who tweeted us this said it was a really interesting documentary.
I thought it was extraordinarily well done. There are some very specific things in there that I disagree with based on my own research and my own book, but it's a fascinating film, and I still highly recommend it. It's wrong about several things. In other words, the shooter from the sixth floor of the Texas School Book Depository building is indeed Malcolm Wallace, who was working for Lyndon Johnson. We know this because Wallace left his fingerprints on the cardboard boxes in the so called crow's nest, and they match the prints that are on file with the Texas Rangers because Mr. Wallace was convicted of first degree murder in 1951. There are those who come forward to say that the fingerprints are not a match. I have to go back and look at the statistics, but legally they have to be a match on 42 points. In this case, they're a match on more than 60. There's no question in my mind, based on the fingerprints and also on the testimony of at least 6 eyewitnesses who describe a man in the window of the sixth floor as being middle aged, heavy set, balding, and wearing spectacles. That is a perfect description of Malcolm Wallace. And quite pointedly, it is not a description of Lee Harvey Oswald. But the documentary itself is quite good.
Yeah, it does sound interesting. Our next question is, when and how did you come to know Christ?
Say that again, please.
When and how did you come to know Christ?
Oh, how did I? How? Well, I was baptized as a Catholic, and my mother was a very strict churchgoer, and she required us to go to Sunday school and also go to Mass. So I was always a believer. I just became lax in my followings of his teaching. Success will do that to you. Too much money, too much alcohol, the availability of easy women, and wine, women, and song, as they say. So I make no bones about the fact that in the period I lived in Washington, I was a libertine and I wandered far from the Lord. But as they say, there are no atheists in foxholes. And time came in this horrific ordeal that I had undergone, in which I was facing, certain death in prison. that I redeem myself, that I redeem myself in the blood of the cross, which requires you to confess your sins and pray for forgiveness. We have a very magnificent and powerful Lord, but He's also a forgiving Lord. Forgiveness is the key, but you can get no forgiveness without confession. I confess my sins. Now, on the one hand, I think once you are baptized as a Catholic, you are always a Catholic. I am no longer attending Catholic services, however, because the epic corruption of the Catholic Church, and specifically the current Pope, who I believe to be illegitimate. Benedict, who recently died, was the real Pope. I think he was forced out over pain, threat of death. He is the last anti communist, anti globalist Pope we had. Pope Francis, I wonder whether he can really read because he clearly cannot read the Bible. Francis, for example, says that private property, the ownership of private property, is a sin against the Lord. No, the Bible actually memorializes private property and free enterprise in 9 separate places. So I think he's a globalist. I applaud his concern for the poor. As a Christian, we must all be concerned about the poor and the disadvantaged. But the Catholic Church, which was once a bulwark of anti communism, has now just become a globalist operation. I'm a proud congregant at the Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church. Doesn't mean I'm a Presbyterian. I guess at this juncture, I consider myself a non denominational Christian. There's a lot of different sects of Christianity, and there's a lot of internal disagreement about a lot of things. But the one common denominator is whether you believe in the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I do. And therefore, I'm extraordinarily comfortable in a church that was founded by Dr. James Kennedy, that was dedicated by the great Billy Graham, who I had an opportunity to meet when I worked for President Richard Nixon, and whose son Franklin Graham played a key role in my own return to the church and in my own redemption.
Is there anything conservative about the US GOP and Trump?
I think that unfortunately we have reached a place in America, despite my deep affection and sentimental attachment to the Republican Party as the party of Lincoln and the party of Goldwater and the party of Reagan and the party of Trump, in which the elites of the two parties have become a uniparty. The neocon domination of the highest echelon of both parties is very clear. Donald Trump's nomination is the hijacking, the hostile takeover, if you will, of the Republican Party, changing it from the country club party to the party of working people. Now, one thing that I have seen, I saw it under Reagan, I saw it again under Trump, when the Republican establishment or the two party duopoly, if you will, when they cannot beat you, they try to co opt you. And there's no question that to some extent, the Trump presidency was co opted by the establishment. But in the larger sense, not. Donald Trump canceled the Iranian arms deal. Donald Trump canceled the Paris Climate Accords. Donald Trump stopped the Chinese from manipulating our currency and stopped them from stealing our technology. He also put tariffs on them and collected billions of dollars from them. Not because he is not a free trader, but because the rules had been slanted against us. He also cut taxes and regulation when he was told that could not be done. He gave us the most robust, most productive economy in our history. Yes, I consider that to be very conservative. At the same time, he did appoint a number of people who swore their allegiance to him and his agenda, but who were quislings. And I think if he is afforded a second term as president, he would correct those mistakes.
Are the J6 who are imprisoned political prisoners?
There's no question that there is. What really bothers me is the lack of due process. Not only that, but the horrific conditions in which they're being held, all of which appears to me to be in violation of the Geneva Conventions. It means that this country, under this administration, treats terrorists better than we treat American citizens, even those who are, in some cases, charged with serious crimes. In other cases, those who are charged with minor crimes, such as trespassing. In many cases, you have people who have been incarcerated, waiting for charges, waiting for arraignment, or waiting for trial for a period longer than the average term that they would get if convicted of the crime at hand. So I think this is a horrific uh, scandal. I think the treatment of these individuals is something that should never be allowed in America. If somebody broke the law, yes, they should be prosecuted, but they have a constitutional right to speedy trial. They have a constitutional right to access the law books and the evidence against them. I think that has been denied them. I really don't know how this attorney general sleeps at night because this is not a fair administration of justice. You will notice in the January 6 hearings, my name dragged through the mud repeatedly. Let me be very clear one more time. Any claim or assertion that I knew in advance about, participated in, or condoned any illegal action whatsoever on January 6th or any other date and any other time or place is categorically false. And there is no witness, no email, no text message, no phone call, no encrypted message that would prove otherwise. This is just the bitter recriminations of people who can't get over the fact that I survived the last attempt on my life by the deep state and who would therefore venture to do another one. So the people at ABC, for example, who have engaged in constant guilt by association. Roger Stone knows members or met members of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. That's called guilt by association. That proves nothing whatsoever, other than I came in contact with people who have been accused of crimes. It doesn't mean I knew about their crimes in advance or in real time. It is extraordinarily irresponsible, but that's what you get from the media.
And our last question is, have you ever considered running for office?
I would be a terrible candidate for office. I'm not. I don't have the personality or the skill set. I don't suffer fools gladly, although I've gotten better at it than I used to be. I have a lot of skeletons in my closet because, as I told you, I lived for many years prior to my redemption in Christ as a libertine. I did truly crazy things, and they're not the kind of things you want to have in your public officials because they could open one theoretically to blackmail. No, I didn't murder anybody, but let's just say I lived a very colorful lifestyle. And that's 30 years behind me. People on Twitter like to continue to bring it up, but I'm not candidate material. I'm much more interested at this juncture in my life. I really don't want to be a combatant so much as I want to write about and talk about politics, having a deep experience in it, and therefore hopefully being able to bring insights to the table that others might not have.
Before we let you go, Roger, where can people find you on social media?
The best place now, of course, is Twitter, where I am Roger J. Stone Jr., Roger J. Stone Jr. Also at Truth Social, where I am Real Roger Stone. They're not uniform because, unfortunately, some squatter at Truth Social has my real name. At Telegram, I am Roger J. Stone Jr. At Getter, which I really rarely use. Once again, some squatter has my real name. So I am Roger Stone USA, I believe. And then, of course, on Gab, where I am Roger J. Stone Jr. yet again. It's kind of a grab bag. Also, the Stones, pardon me, stonezone.com. Stonezone.com if you want to get your Roger Stone Did Nothing Wrong t shirt or your signed official copy of my presidential pardon, or buy my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, or whether you want to get one of my official Roger Stones, which is a simple white stone to which I have signed my name. which you can utilize as a good luck charm if you want the small size, or as a paperweight if you want the large size. Again, go to the shop at stonezone.com. You can also see videos and things I have written there and so on. And then, as I said, lastly, my new Substack, rogerstone.substack.com, if you want to see my international best and worst dressed list.
This is a bit I'm going to cut out of the podcast, but I've got my eye on your FBI photo. Do you ship to outside of the States?
We will. We normally do not, because our payment mechanism, I think, does not allow it. But if you DM me directly on Twitter, I'd be happy to send you complimentary copies of everything.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today. I know it's a really busy time for you. And I would also say, listen to or watch the Stone Zone on Rumble. I watch it quite religiously as well.
Yes, I should bring that up. So every day at 5 o'clock Eastern, I'm up at stonezone.live, which means you can see it at Rumble, you can see it at Telegram, you can see it at frankspeech.com, which is our home base. I should have mentioned that first, I guess. Every day, 5 o'clock p.m., stonezone.live. I do 1 hour of news, politics, history, style, fashion, food. It's kind of a grab bag, but check it out. I must say, doing a daily show is an enormous amount of work. I'm not sure people can appreciate how much work it is, but I am enjoying it, and it is getting traction. Thanks for reminding me. And folks, check it out at stonezone.live, 5 o'clock Eastern time, 5 days a week.
So that was Roger Stone. Sadly, I never got to speak because of Scott, fanboy there. But who taught me to research in-depth questions, which I never done, so I'm glad. But no, what an interesting character. What a fantastic guest. Full of knowledge, full of information, and you can tell he likes to talk. So he's great. And I think we'll definitely have to get him back on again. Maybe he's close to the US election time. And I think it was just great to have someone like that on that has so much knowledge of US politics, but also has very strong opinions on certain aspects, which I thought was great. With a good sense of humour, may I add.
Yeah.
His sense of humour is we Brits are known for a sense of humour, and the Yanks are not as much, but he has a good sense of humour. And like I say, I think he's fantastic. I would love to have got his opinions on the Afghanistan withdrawal, which is the one question I wanted to throw out there. But I'm sure we can ask that another point. What's your two opinions on, obviously, Roger coming on and his very, very intriguing replies and responses to the questions?
He is incredibly interesting.
I mean, I'm a fanboy, so that's all I'll say. I was well chuffed that he came on the show and took the time to talk to us.
I could tell at the start you were a little nervous.
I was a little bit nervous.
Yes,
yeah.
I could tell because you stuttered as you started. I was thinking, compared to the other interviews, that was a wobble.
I mean, he's a hell of a figure, though, isn't he? You can see why people are being intimidated by him.
Oh, 100%. And it's just, he has that. Obviously, people aren't going to be able to see the video of this. They're just going to hear the audio.
He's a dude looking wise, isn't he?
He is, yeah. He's got that look. He's got that brand, hasn't he? He's got his own personal brand and the way he styles himself. I love the glasses.
Yeah, they're
You
awesome.
need to get some of them glasses, Scott.
Yeah, let's paint these black in the middle.
Yeah. But no, what a fantastic character. What a great guest. And although, strictly, I don't fully agree with all the answers he gave, I'm not the biggest fan of certain presidents. However, I found his information, I found his opinion, his side of the story interesting and very well backed as well. It wasn't just chucked out there as this is what happened. He actually backed everything up. Obviously, we could, if we wanted to, take time to cross-reference everything, but I'm not. And I thought it was fantastic. And I thought, as a guest, as someone who has such a strong opinion, such strong connection to the US politics, it was great to have him on, and we'll be sure to have him on again. But yeah, so next guest. Who's our next guest? Who are we getting on the podcast next for people to subscribe and follow us?
Our next guest is a Roger Stone ally by the name of Bobby Jeffries.
So if you haven't already, get your questions in. We're going to be interviewing Bobby in just 2 days, isn't it? Or is it tomorrow?
It may be tomorrow now, yeah. Tomorrow we moved it.
It could be tomorrow. So sadly, Bobby couldn't make it. So we have actually. So who's our guest after Bobby? Do we know? It's going to be.
After Bobby, we will have Deanna Davison on.
Is it Deanna, or
Yeah.
do we have someone coming in at the weekend for?
Well, we haven't
recording?
confirmed that yet, but we potentially
Not
will have
confirmed
Peter
yet.
Barnes.
So either Deanna or Peter Barnes from the UK side, so back to our side of the pond. If you have any
Yep.
questions for either of them two, chuck them on, and it'd be interesting. I'm quite looking forward to Deanna. She's a local politician to me, so I've got quite a few questions in regards to Bishop Auckland, County Durham, and just the Red Wall in general, and her decision to leave politics, which is going to be intriguing. But yeah, no, it's been fantastic. Thank you for listening yet again. Please hit follow on whatever you're listening to us on. Hit subscribe if you're on YouTube and the like button. And follow us on Twitter at Politics Chinwag. And yeah, thanks. Bye.